Mesopotamia, the land where some of humanity's earliest civilizations were born. The rivers Euphrates and Tigris gave life to these fertile lands. For thousands of years, cities rose here and powerful kings ruled. And this region became the stage for the first great empires in human history. One of these cities was Babylon, rising along the Euphrates River. Over time, Babylon became one of the most powerful cities in Mesopotamia. Trade routes met here, and people gathered within its walls. For centuries, Babylon remained one of the most important centers of the region. But for a time, Babylon lived under the shadow of a far greater empire. This empire was the most feared power of the ancient Near East. Its armies were disciplined, and its warriors were ruthless. It was the Assyrian Empire, ruling Mesopotamia with iron authority. The Assyrian Empire was one of the most powerful military states of the ancient world. Its armies were disciplined, and its soldiers highly experienced. With iron weapons and war chariots, they spread fear across their enemies. Through this power, much of Mesopotamia fell under Assyrian control. As the Assyrian armies advanced, many cities became their targets. Rebellious cities faced brutal and relentless sieges. Walls were shattered and entire cities burned in flames. These ruthless wars made Assyria a feared power across the region. Yet no empire remains powerful forever. Years of wars and rebellions began to weaken the Assyrian state. The empire was vast, but that vastness became a weakness. Controlling uprisings across such a huge land was becoming harder and harder. As the Assyrian Empire weakened, a new hope began to rise in Babylon. The leading figures of the city were watching this opportunity closely. For the first time, Assyria's power seemed truly shaken. And in Babylon, some were preparing to rise for freedom. In 626 BC, a new leader emerged in Babylon. His name was Nabopolassar, and he began a rebellion against Assyrian rule. This uprising was more than just a revolt. It was the beginning of a great change. Because the people of Babylon wanted to reclaim their own destiny. Nabopolassar quickly secured his power in Babylon. The rebellion against Assyria grew into a full movement for independence. Eventually, Nabopolassar was proclaimed king of Babylon. With this, a new era for Babylon had begun. Babylon was not alone in the war against Assyria. Another rising power stood in the east, the Medes. A powerful alliance was formed between the Median king and Babylon. This alliance would change the fate of the Assyrian Empire. The Babylonian and Median armies began to move together. Their goal was to destroy the power of the Assyrian Empire. The two great armies marched across the lands of Mesopotamia. Their targets were the great cities at the heart of Assyria. Eventually, the armies reached Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. This city was one of the greatest and most powerful centers of the empire. With its massive walls and strong defenses, it was expected to resist for a long time. But the Babylonian and Median armies surrounded the city. In 612 BC, the fate of Nineveh was sealed. After a long siege, the mighty walls of the city collapsed. The Babylonian and Median armies entered the city. And with that, the heart of the Assyrian Empire had fallen. Once one of the most powerful cities in the world, Nineveh now lay in ruins. Palaces had fallen, and statues were shattered. The glorious Assyrian capital was sinking into silence. And with it, the mighty Assyrian Empire began to fade into history. With the fall of the Assyrian Empire, the balance of power in Mesopotamia changed. At the center of this change stood Babylon. The city began to grow and regain its strength. A new and glorious era for Babylon was beginning. The man behind Babylon's rise was King Nebuchadnezzar. He would be remembered as the ruler who freed the city from Assyrian control. Under his rule, the Neo-Babylonian Empire began to grow stronger. Babylon was becoming the new power of Mesopotamia. Beside Nabopolassar grew a young prince. He would become one of the most famous kings in Babylonian history. His name was Nebuchadnezzar, and he would transform Babylon into one of the most powerful cities of the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar gained experience on the battlefield at a young age. He joined important campaigns at the head of Babylonian forces. His courage and military skill quickly drew attention. These experiences were preparing him to become a great king. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar ascended the throne of Babylon. The new king quickly secured control over the empire. His rule would begin one of the most powerful periods in Babylon's history. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Babylon entered a massive reconstruction era. The city expanded with enormous walls, palaces, and temples. Babylon soon became one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Babylon grew into a powerful imperial center. The city became both a political and economic hub of the region. Babylon was now considered the heart of Mesopotamia. One of the most famous structures of Nebuchadnezzar's reign was the Ishtar Gate. It was decorated with blue glazed bricks and reliefs. The gate symbolized the power and magnificence of Babylon. Babylon was not only a magnificent city, but also a powerful fortress. The city was surrounded by enormous defensive walls. These walls protected Babylon from external threats. One of the most famous stories about Babylon is the Hanging Gardens. Ancient sources describe them as gardens built on massive terraces. They were said to be one of the most impressive wonders of the ancient world. Babylon was not only a powerful city but also a major center of trade. Caravans from distant lands gathered within its markets. Through trade, Babylon became a wealthy and vibrant city. Babylon was also an important center of knowledge and science. Significant work was done, especially in astronomy. Babylonian priests observed the sky and carefully recorded the stars. As the years passed, Nebuchadnezzar began to grow old. His reign had created Babylon's most powerful era. But with the death of the great king, the empire would enter a new chapter. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, stability in Babylon began to decline. Several short-lived kings took the throne, and palace conflicts increased. This gradually weakened the strength of the empire. Meanwhile, a new power was rising in the east. Cyrus the Great of Persia was building a rapidly expanding empire. Soon, Babylon became one of his main targets. In 539 BC, the Persian army reached Babylon. The city fell into Persian hands with little resistance. And with that, the Neo-Babylonian Empire came to an end. But this story does not end here. Follow and subscribe to see what comes next.